Check your final position. I'm going to take her down.
Wait a few more minutes, Skipper.
Do as I say.
It looks like...
Do as I say.
Give him a few more minutes.
I've already waited too long. Here we go.
No, we don't. Get a hold of yourself, you yellow.
Welcome to the Standardization and CRM Lesson 1 for the Commercial Pilot Ground School course. This video is being used either as a review for people who attended in class or for people who are completing the makeup. For people who attended class, this was a spot for your CRM questions. We're going to work into the section on career resource management. We have to remember that even though we're flying as a single pilot in our training, we are aiming to have a crew mentality with what we do, and understanding concepts that crews employ with each other is very important. When we think about career resource management, we do think about the effective use of all aviation resources needed to complete a safe and efficient flight. It will be important for you to understand the concept that we are trying to achieve a safe flight. Safer, safest flight really doesn't define here, but just an overall safe flight, as well as one that has an efficiency to it. You being the captain of this airplane, that is the pilot in command, have an enormous responsibility, not only for your life, but the lives of your crew members and any passengers that are on board. Keep in mind, as you fly over the ground, you are responsible for those people that you are flying over. In order to work together as a crew, you have to understand there are certain skills that are available. Gone are the days where it's one pilot flying, as like the comic here suggests. We don't fly solo when we're up in those big airliners anymore. We have to employ skills. We call these the CRM skills. And the 7 ones that I have listed here are common throughout the industry, although when you go to a particular operator, they may have different sets. They may have similar ones or additional skills for you to consider. Let's take a look at these individually, starting with command. We're looking at the exercise of duties associated with the position of pilot in command. So that is the captain of the airplane. The captain's authority as that pilot in command is responsible for the operation of the flight, the decisions that are made, and they're also held accountable for actions taken or not taken. They're the one that is coordinating the crew through different efforts and phases of flight. You should always be on the lookout when command breaks down. That's what the red box here is showing you, some common warning signs that the person who's responsible and the final authority for the aircraft may not be employing the command properly, especially if they do not accept the responsibility for a decision or an action. If they have some sort of dictatorial or arrogant attitude, or they don't involve the crew members. You may see from time to time the first officer checklist memes where it might say, checklist item 1, sit there. Checklist item 2, do nothing. Gone are those days, right? We work together as a crew. Let's take a look at an accident that was caused by a command issue. And that was Alaska Airlines Flight 60 back in the late 70s. Boeing 727 crashed going into Alaska. And the big reason for this was the captain did not have an open cockpit. It was more of a cold climate in terms of communication, and that the other crew members were not comfortable speaking to the captain, especially when the captain was doing something incorrectly. And on this day, the captain came in off the ILS approach too high and too fast. The airplane landed very long down the runway. It was not able to stop in time before running off the runway. The crew members did not feel that they could tell the captain he was flying incorrectly. And the captain was very arrogant in his attitude that he could get the airplane down on the ground and stopped in time. As that wasn't the case, we have an accident here. So it's very important for you to understand that you have to speak up when something is not right. And as the captain, you have to make sure you're fostering an environment that allows that to happen. The next skill is leadership. Although a captain certainly is a leader, leadership can extend to any crew member who's exercising one of their responsibilities, ensuring a safe, efficient, and successful flight. This can be simply explained as the captain wants you to get updated weather at your destination and alternate airports. When the captain's given you a responsibility, it's up to you then to figure out how you're going to do it, the tools you need to get it done, and then to actually do it. The captain is not going to be looking over your shoulder, making sure you're doing it a particular way. They just want you to get the job done. It's up to you to get it done. You're also a leader when it comes to the crew climate and also recognizing when there's conflict amongst crew members. It's your job to try and de-escalate this as a leader. A flight accident that happened a number of years ago does stress the importance of good leadership. And that would be the Miracle on the Hudson flight from U.S. Airways 1549. We all know that flock of birds was ingested in both engines and the aircraft was not able to continue normal flight or return back to the departure airport. So Captain Sullenberger decided the Hudson River was the best location for a splashdown. Now keep in mind, this flight from takeoff to splashdown was only 6 minutes. That's 0.1 in the logbook. And that bird strike left them with about 4 minutes remaining until splashdown. There wasn't a lot of time for the captain and the first officer, Jeffrey Skiles, to communicate and talk about what are their best options. They had very little time to deal with engine failures, as well as where to go while trying to communicate to ATC. Keep in mind they have about 159 passengers in the back, plus cabin crew. And at no time did the captain talk to the lead flight attendant and say, hey, we're going to be in the Hudson, so why don't you get everybody ready to get wet? No, there was only one communication from the captain, and that was the announcement over the PA system, this is the captain, brace for impact. So the captain assigned the cabin crew in the back with the responsibility of preparing the cabin for this water landing. And the cabin crew had to take it upon themselves to figure out how they were going to do that. Nor did the captain check up with them again. Him and the first officer simply continued flying the airplane all the way down to the Hudson River. The next skill is resource management. This is where we are identifying and prioritizing the use of information, other forms of assistance that are both internal and external to the aircraft. There are many different resources that can be utilized by the pilot, especially in this day with the iPad and electronic flight bag. But they also have various printed resources in the cockpit, not to forget about the radio and being able to contact air traffic control or maintenance base. And from time to time, there's even resources back in the cabin for the captain to use. Captain should never discount input from any source, nor should a crew ever be complacent about irregular situations. When it comes to resource management, we have an excellent example. It is an accident that occurred, but many lives were saved because the crew utilized excellent resource management, amongst other skills. And we're talking about the flight with United 232 going into Sioux City, Iowa. Of course, this was the DC-10 flight that suffered a number 2 engine failure that actually caused a damage and took out all 3 of the hydraulic line systems. So the crew struggled with control of the aircraft, and one of the first things they decided to do was try to fix the problem, so they got out their quick reference manual, the QRM. And of course, that was their internal resource. Pull out the checklist, follow the checklist. The only problem is the QRM did not have a procedure for a triple hydraulic failure. So, although it was a good resource, it did not solve the problem. So the crew thought externally, let's contact maintenance base. So through a radio service known as AirRink, they were able to get in touch with their maintenance base, explain to them the problem, and they asked for the procedure to follow. So again, a good identification of another external resource. But again, there was a problem. This external resource, the maintenance base, did not have the procedures for a triple hydraulic failure, as the manufacturer did not ever imagine that this was possible. So the maintenance base was no help for this crew. What they finally managed to come up with by reviewing the passenger list is they noticed a deadheading captain, a training captain on the DC-10, riding as a passenger. The captain was invited up to the cockpit, and through the use of asymmetrical thrust from the engines was able to regain control of the aircraft, be able to fly it straight, make gentle turns, and get it to descend toward Sioux City, Iowa airport. Now keep in mind that these wings on these jetliners are critical airfoils, and they need to go fast in order to do a highly efficient job with lift production. When they get slow, these wings need extra help. They need lift augmentation through slats, flaps, slots. On the DC-10, these are all hydraulically actuated devices. Well, that just means that the pilots do not have any supplemental lift or augmented lift capability. So when the airplane got a bit too slow, it basically started to nosedive, and then it hit the surface and tumbled. Around half of the people did survive the impact. Just a very big testament to resource management being used. The next skill is communication. We're trying to exchange ideas or information, instruction in an effective, timely manner so messages are correctly received and clearly understood. These exchanges most often occur through speaking, they require listening, but there also might be non-verbal signals involved. Part of communication, we should make sure we don't ignore crew member statements. Everybody has something important to say, so we need to listen to them. Nor should we ridicule crew members for coming up with different ideas. In aviation, we have a common language. It is English. That wasn't the case many years ago, back in the 70s, as a flight out of Central America was trying to land in a stormy New York night. Avianca Flight 52 had a crew of 3, but only the first officer spoke English. It wasn't required at the time for the entire crew to speak English. They knew they were getting low on fuel, and they were having to go through holding patterns as the weather was bad getting into New York. So the captain instructed the first officer to contact air traffic control, declare an emergency for fuel. They needed priority handling to the airport. For some reason, a reason we probably won't ever understand fully, the first officer did not declare the emergency and kind of glossed over the fact that they were terribly low on fuel. That fuel was now at a critical point. And then keep in mind that as they got from holding pattern to holding pattern. They were also transferred to different ATC sectors, and so the message was never communicated amongst ATC personnel that Avianca Flight 52 was fuel critical. Had they known that, or had the emergency been declared, this would not have been an accident. But as it turns out, they did get finally cleared for the approach. Weather caused them to do a missed approach. Unfortunately, they just weren't going to have enough fuel to make it back to the runway again. Although they did attempt it, about 7 miles short of the runway, they ended up running out of fuel, and they crashed in a forested area. Out of this accident, we did finally get a proper ATC term or phrase, minimum fuel advisory. Of course, we know that's not an emergency, but it tells ATC we can't accept any delays. Our next CRM skill is situational awareness. And your instructors probably talked to you about this one as the big picture. Where am I? And that is correct, but there's more to it than just where am I right now. It's also where is the aircraft going to be in the future? And it's not just the aircraft itself, it's also the status of the crew. Keep in mind as you are going through your checklist as a first officer, the captain's going through a different set of procedures or flows, and you two need to be well aware of who's starting a particular checklist flow or a completed one. You should be on the lookout for situation awareness issues if the crew ever loses the big picture of where they are, or they don't resolve confusion, relying too much on cockpit automation. There's certainly an accident that occurred out in the Northwest, United Flight 173 going into Portland. On final for the ILS, putting the gear down, they got 2 green lights instead of 3. So the crew was trying to figure out, do we have a gear problem or do we have a burned out light bulb? So the crew became distracted with this, especially the captain, and they decided to hold at the outer marker, waiting to get the landing gear issue resolved before completing the approach. The crew members did inform the captain of the remaining fuel, but they used pounds of fuel instead of time. While the captain was flying the airplane or monitoring the autopilot, as well as trying to troubleshoot this issue, they continued in the hold. Even though the crew members kept telling them how much fuel they had remaining, it was confusing since only pounds were being used, again, instead of minutes. So the captain decided to go around the hold one more time and then conduct the approach. Unfortunately, in that hold, that last trip, both engines flamed out and the aircraft crashed. This is a simple example of a light bulb that wasn't working. That became a distraction, and confusing members from the statements from the crew members did not help the captain out here. A couple more skills to go through here: decision making, a process of determining and implementing a course of action, evaluating the outcome. Remember that it is the captain's authority here and as the final decision maker. The cockpit is not a democratic place. Just because you have multiple crew members, you don't outvote the captain. One of the accidents that we highlight here is Delta Flight 191 back in the 70s, going into Dallas-Fort Worth. The crew did not assess risks going in on a hot summer day in Dallas. Thunderstorms had formed in the area, and the crew even noted lightning coming out of a cloud on the approach path. As this should have been a warning sign to the crew to abandon the approach, they just marveled at the lightning that came out of the cloud, and they continued the approach. Ended up hitting a microburst. approximately 6,000 feet per minute downward was the microburst energy. It caused the L-1011 to hit the ground, to bounce, and then finally burst into flames upon impact a second time. People did survive this, but a lot of people did end up dying unnecessarily here. So as a crew member, you do have to assess the risks. And our last skill here is workload management. Planning and prioritizing, delegating tasks to ensure equitable workload distribution. That term equitable simply means an equal workload. So as a captain, you have to recognize when crew members are overwhelmed with their duties or behind on their duties and figure out how to get things done. Always be on the lookout when you're focusing on the present situation and not the future, or if crew members are not completing tasks. An accident that happened was back in Detroit Metro in the 80s, Northwest Flight 255. As the crew was taxiing out for takeoff, ATC gave them a runway change to the short runway. So the captain had the first officer recalculate performance, making sure that they were okay for departure from the shorter runway. What the first officer was supposed to do during this time was to complete the before takeoff checklist. And an interesting note, at this time, Northwest did not have a printed checklist flow for the crew to follow. It was simply a memory flow. And also at this time, Northwest's procedures did not have the captain verify that these checks were done before takeoff. So there was no paper checklist backup and no verification from the other crew member. So remember, the first officer was recalculating performance, not making sure that the flaps were set, slats and slots were set, or stabilizer trim pitch setting. Since these weren't properly set, the airplane struggled when they did get to the takeoff phase. It didn't get very high in the air, struck a pole, struck a building, and came down in a culvert. One person did survive that, which was a 2-year-old girl named Jessica. If you want to hear her story, you can look her up on YouTube. So lots of events have happened because of a lack of CRM. So keep in mind that as a crew member, you need to be able to work together with these skills for a safe and efficient flight.